Remote Evil. Book 1. Chapter 4. Point of No Return. This audiovisual book was created by Joseph Russell Tim Pugh Gyson. He continued to stalk Cherry when he has time. He always masturbated while stalking her. He reasoned that Cherry deserved to be masturbated upon. He thinks she is just another ordinary dirty slut and she was fair game to his dirty mind. He also masturbated on a lot of women he just saw on the streets, the many images of women on the internet and most especially on the women on porn websites. His anger of Cherry slowly receded. He started calming down. Without thinking of Cherry as a possible wife for him, his mind went back to concentrating on becoming extremely rich. Since he is not going to the gym anymore and due to the fact that he lives an inactive secluded life, he grew much fatter but not necessarily obese. He did not mind this. He is only concentrating on becoming extremely rich. For him, being rich will enable him to have beautiful women, which might also include Cherry. He continued working extremely hard. He continued learning new technologies. He continued pirating the technologies of his company and modifying it for his financial gain. He was happy. He never cares that he was alone and have no friends anymore. Stalking Cherry, masturbating, working hard, learning new things and pirating the technologies of his company was his life. He was concentrated on becoming very rich like the celebrity techies and rap stars he sees on media. But one day things changed. He was stalking Cherry just like before when he saw on the monitors of his van a sports car stop at the driveway of the house of Cherry. Dan and Cherry stepped out of the sports car. It was not a unique scene. Norman would often see Dan visiting Cherry and staying late. He often sees their silhouettes cuddled together in the living room watching television. He never minded Dan visiting Cherry. He would just monitor them until Dan left, then he goes home too. Sometimes Cherry will be out of the house at night and probably be having a good time with friends or with Dan. He would patiently wait until she returns home so he can masturbate while watching her silhouette. As usual, he would monitor them while they spend most of the night watching television cuddled together. But things are different this night. Dan and Cherry were not only cuddling but were embracing and kissing each other feverishly. Norman started to chain smoke in his van. His anger has been renewed. He wants Dan dead. He was so angry with Cherry that he fantasized of beating and raping her. He finished all his cigarettes and there was nothing left. This further angered him. After a while their silhouettes started to disappear. They were moving to another part of the house where Norman cannot monitor them with his wall-seeing technology. Norman was quietly hysterical. He smashed his fists on the controls of his equipment. He feels that something is about to happen and he fears it. He was right to fear. The next time he was able to track their silhouettes, they were in the bedroom. He watched on his monitor as he saw their silhouettes undress each other and get to bed. His heart was broken again. This time he did not shut off his monitor while Cherry was having sex with someone else. He was curious of how they will have sex. Norman has watched Cherry and her husband before having sex. He watched Cherry and her husband having sex several times before until he could no longer bear it. But tonight was different. Cherry was having sex with a different man. Dan is different from the husband of Cherry, he noticed. While the husband of Cherry did traditional simple sex with her, Dan was different. He and Cherry were doing several new sex positions that Norman has not seen before. Norman hoped that Cherry was not enjoying having sex with Dan. Dan and Cherry had sex throughout the night. Norman continued to watch even though his drone is in danger of being found out. The sun will start to rise in under an hour and he was way beyond his regular time of stalking her. While Dan and Cherry were probably having the time of their lives having sex, Norman was at the saddest moment of his life. His anger of Dan and Cherry was overshadowed by his pity on himself. He continued to watch until they stopped moving. He thought everything was over. He was wrong. Dan and Cherry stood up. Dan took Cherry from behind against the wall. Norman nearly exploded in anger. He always fantasized of doing this to Cherry, and now a man was doing it to her and not him. He still hoped that Cherry was not enjoying what Dan was doing to her. His pity on himself turned again to boiling anger to Dan and Cherry. But he still hoped that Cherry is not enjoying what Dan is doing to her. After a while he monitored the couple going back to the living room. They parted ways. Norman only saw one silhouette in the living room. Whoever it was dressing up. Norman assumed it was Dan. After a while he saw the silhouettes leave the house. He can clearly see in the remaining night Dan boarding his car. He still hoped that Cherry did not enjoy what Dan had just done to her sexually. But before the car of Dan was able to leave the driveway, Cherry kissed Dan. She was just wearing a bathrobe. Norman was utterly crushed by this scene. His hopes that Cherry did not enjoy what Dan had done to her sexually has been crushed. He was wrong. Based on what he saw, he concluded that Cherry liked and even enjoyed what Dan has done to her sexually. Norman wants Dan dead. Very dead. Norman wants Cherry to suffer. He wants to rape her savagely. Norman is different now. Norman was corrupt. Norman wants to rape women in his fantasies. But they were just fantasies before, because Norman does not want to hurt people. He may have evil thoughts on people, especially women, but they were all fantasies. Now he begins to really consider raping a woman and murdering a man. He went home before the sun went up. He did not go to work the next day. He ate and slept occasionally the whole day, but spent the rest of the time researching on the internet on the many secret ways of killing a man. End of chapter.